Good morning, YouTubers. This is my 1985 GL1200, and I'm posting this video because I know some of you out there may want forward controls on your bike, and there's not any available to buy, and they can be a little difficult to build because of the way the engine sticks out the side here. So I'm going to start here with the shifter side. Now, these foot pads, these are aftermarket foot pads that came on the bike. I'm not sure what brand they are. They were chrome and chipped and in bad condition, so I powder coated them. But anyway, so on the shift side, I made a shift lever. I have some half-inch round bar just right off the shelf at Home Depot. The end of the shift lever here is an old broken ratchet that I used. It had a nice knurling on it, so I was able to weld that on, and makes a pretty nice shift arm. As far as getting it connected to the actual shifter, you have to come down underneath here and take a closer look with me. So I'll start at the shift lever itself. The factory shift lever is still on the motorcycle. It's a little hard to see here. Let me see if I can get it into focus. Here's it. Okay, so here's the shift lever. And basically what I did is I welded a socket, just a 3/8 drive socket, to the shift lever back here. Now when you weld this on, you have to be careful that you don't weld it all the way around. You want to do about halfway around the circle so that you don't weld the spline clamp into a position that it can't move. And then coming off of the shifter is the socket. As I said, I drilled and tapped this set screw in here to take up a little bit of the slop. And then this is a 3/8 drive extension that I cut the other end off. I welded this lever to it. Now I'll move the factory shifter here, and you can see the shafts, or what used to be the 3/8 drive extension. You can see that rotating a little bit, and you can see it out here. Now here you have just plain old 1/4-inch Heim joints. I got these off of Amazon, not very expensive. A piece of threaded rod in the middle from the hardware store. And so this runs up to the mounting bar for the foot pad. Now from the factory, this bar was square. I had to change it over to a piece of round stock, and then I was able to slide a piece of tube over that and weld the shift arm to it. I also had to add this bracket off of the bottom of the crash bar. Now I know, aka Jimmy, you're doing a bobber build. I don't know if you're planning to keep the crash bars on here or not, but everything that I've done works off of the crash bars. I have seen people run a bar across the front of the frame over here and set up highway pegs a little bit further out, but there's really not a lot on the internet showing how that's done. So I basically worked off of the crash bars because I plan to keep them. So if you're removing those, you might have to do something else, but hopefully you'll be able to maybe pick up some inspiration from what I've done here. So anyway, that takes care of the shift side, and you can see that on the shifter you can actually still ride from the factory foot peg position and still have access to the fully functional shifter. So you can shift to the bike from either position. That's not the case on the brake side. I wasn't able to incorporate the factory rear brake with the forward control. You have to forgive my cinematography here. It's a little hard to see my screen in the sun. So I hope I'm getting everything for you. So I'm going to switch over to the brake side now. I'm going to kind of pan out here a little bit so you can see what it looks like on the shifter. So as far as the brakes go, with the 85 GL1200, they used, Honda used what was called linked braking, so that when you stepped on the rear brake pedal, you actually sent brake pressure to the rear brake caliper and one of the front brake calipers. I eliminated that linking system. There are plenty of how-tos on the internet on how to do that. It's basically just rerouting the brake lines and plumbing and such, but that's a different subject. So for the front brake, for the forward control, I eliminated the factory brake master cylinder, which is back here, goes behind this cover back here, you can't really see it, so that's not there anymore. Also ended up removing the factory rear brake pedal. Initially I had wanted to keep the factory pedal functional as well, but it proved to be a little bit too complicated. I couldn't get the braking performance that I needed to the rear brake. Also, another upgrade I did in terms of the rear brake, I went to Galfer USA, that's Galfer USA. They make all kinds of custom brake hoses, and they actually have a factory fit brake hose that fits the front and rear on these, although if you're unlinking your brakes you can't use the front ones, but changing the rear brake hose to the high performance brake hose had a significant increase in braking performance. Just a little tip there for you. But anyway, back to the subject at hand here. So here's my front foot pad, and what I did here is I got a Willwood single channel master cylinder, and it's a 0.625 inch bore. That's the same bore size as the factory master cylinder. I mounted it, I made a tab to mount it to my crash bar. As you can see here, I just bolt on just the 2 bolts. And then off of a parts bike I have, a 1983 Honda Shadow, I took the rear brake mounting pivot and I took the spline clamp off of the rear brake lever from the Shadow, and then I attached with some 5/8 round stock. I made the brake lever. And you just have to use, some propane and heat this thing up and bend it as best you can, however you want to do it. I realize you may not have an 83 Honda Shadow parts bike around, but this should give you some inspiration on how you can do this. So I was able to use the pivot assembly back here, the pivot shaft that connects right to the Shadow brake arm, and then of course I cut it off here and made my own brake arm. This is the actual foot pad off of the Shadow. And I used this piece of, just a regular piece of rebar, I don't know if you can see it back there, to attach the brake pad, or brake foot pad into place. So the way this works is you just push down here, as you normally would, and that actuates the rear brake master cylinder, sends pressure to the rear brake caliper via this steel brake line here, and it kind of disappears up into the rear area behind the control arm here. And you have to work around your plumbing and that kind of thing. It's not complicated. If you're a handy guy, if you own a welder and torches, you can probably manage to do this pretty easily. The reservoir for the master cylinder, this is not going to be its final location. I've ordered a slightly smaller reservoir. I think I'm going to mount it up here somewhere out of the way, so this is kind of temporary, and it looks it. One thing to be really careful of, it's really critical that you make note of the distance from the pivot to the pedal, and from the pivot to the actuating arm going into that pushes the master cylinder. These distances here, it's really important that you keep these the same distances as the factory setup, because what's going to happen here is if you change this, say for example, if you shorten this distance from the pivot to the pedal, the travel on the pedal is going to get shorter. If you like a nice short travel, that's fine, but you're also losing some leverage, which means that you're going to have to push much harder on the pedal to get it to actuate the brakes properly. The opposite is also true. If you make this too long, you're going to get more travel, but you'll get more leverage, which will give you more pressure to the brake master cylinder. So pay close attention to these distances. You can use your factory brake pedal setup as a template. I think this distance here was about 8 inches, and I think this one was somewhere around 2 inches, and that's the same for the factory setup, and that has a significant impact on braking performance. I had to spend a little bit of time working those things out. Also, the relationship from the pivot to the pedal and the location of the foot pad here has some impact too. It affects the ergonomics or the comfort level of how your foot moves on the brake pedal. So take a little bit of time and work these things out if you're going to do this kind of setup. And I think ultimately you'll be happy with it. It is a little bit of trial and error, but it's well worth it. I can ride very comfortably all day long. I'm a little over 6 feet tall. You get my feet out in front of me is a big advantage. So that's basically it. If you have any questions, of course, you can drop some comments, and I'll try to answer them for you as best I can. Good luck.